Hello and welcome to IEEE Pune's podcast Beyond Conversations. My name is Aditi Bankar and I'm your host on today's episode. Today's guest is Harsh Mishra, a computer engineering graduate from Satyabhama University. He is an extremely passionate and talented software developer. He's currently working as a software development intern at HackerRank as an open source development advocate at Local Stack, also as a community manager at Moja Global. He has made significant contributions to open source development, is a Google Summer of Code organization administrator. He's also been an MLH fellow and a Microsoft student ambassador. Apart from this, he's won many multinational coding and hacking competitions. Today, Harsh is here to talk about his journey, how he began with open source development, the hurdles he passed on the way, his multiple projects, and why he thinks open source development is so important for beginners in the field of software development. He's also going to talk about his talk at the Open Source Summit at the United States of America. So here we go. Welcome, Harsh, to IEEE Pune's podcast, Beyond Conversations. We're very glad to have you here. How are you today?
I'm doing good. Thanks for asking. How about you?
I'm doing great. So, considering your experience in open source development, it is really a very unconventional field for a student who's just starting out. What is open source development?
So open source development is a different paradigm of software development where we just develop software in open view. Like it is just transparent. It is open to the world's view and everyone gets to see on what exactly we are working out. So previously, a lot of different corporate companies like Microsoft or Adobe or like a lot of these companies, they were pretty much developing closed source software. So some of the most popular software that you use today, like Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, and the other kinds of stuff like Adobe Photoshop and more of them, they were entirely closed source. So it means that you cannot actually participate in the development of that particular software. You cannot see on how they're exactly implementing some of the functionalities. And you definitely don't have a say on how exactly the software should be modeled and should be used. So this is where a lot of developers,
Exactly.
especially people like who were working out with some low level stuff, they were pretty enthusiastic about doing open source stuff. So whatever they were building up, they were just putting up in open source so that they can take opinions, they can take feedbacks from different developers. And open source development was the real reason why a lot of different like open source components like really got a boost. The best example for this might be the GNU Linux itself. So Linux is not actually an operating system, it is just a kernel. But since it was kept as an open source software, a lot of different developers came in and they started participating in the development of the whole stuff. And slowly Linux became compatible with a range of devices. Right now, like previously it was just used for desktops, like as an operating system. Right now it is used in supercomputers, satellites, mobile devices, and more of them. If you go to the Linux mailing list today, you will see that developers from all across the world are participating in the development of it. Even developers from different corporate companies like Red Hat, Google, and more of them. So that's exactly what open source development means. So if a company is pretty much doing open source, they're just releasing the software for a public view. And they also let other people to basically contribute in the development. They won't like bar people to say like, hey, you have not done these many lead code questions, or you have not like actually cracked our interview, so you cannot actually contribute to the development of it.
Right.
That's not the case. You can just go to the software. You can see that, okay, this is something that I can potentially fix. It can be a documentation issue. It can be a bug. It can be a simple refactor. And you can just do that and basically contribute something. That's the beauty of open source development. And that's the reason why so many people are attracted to it.
Okay, that's really exciting. So it's basically users get to contribute something to the softwares that they are using.
Exactly.
Currently.
So that's the whole point of it.
So speaking about open source development, how did you start your journey?
So I won't exactly use the word tier here because a lot of students try to signify themselves coming from various tier 2 or tier 3 colleges. But my college had a pretty lack of coding culture. So it was like people were doing different curricular and extracurricular activities, but no one was really interested in coding or software development back then. So it was almost 2018 or 19. I was transitioning from my first year to second year. And the only thing that I knew back at that time was like some basic coding, and I knew like I can create some basic projects. So I was building out various projects in Python. I was doing various certification courses on Coursera and Udemy. And for me, it was like, okay, this is more than enough for me to like get a very good placement once I come in my placement year. So one day I was sitting in my library and one of my seniors came up to me. His name was Akash. So Akash happened to do his Google Summer of Code with OWASP Foundation. For people who don't know what OWASP is, then they basically create tools and softwares for various cybersecurity stuff and various vulnerability issues and more of them. Right now, he's working as an engineer at Twilio. So if you have like any questions about cybersecurity or stuff about like penetration testing and all, just hit him up. So Akash came up to me one day and he was like, whatever you're doing is quite good, but this won't actually cut the bill. So I was very curious on what exactly should I be doing more. And that was when he introduced me to the open source development. He did not go into the depths of explaining what exactly open source is or what is the philosophy behind it. He just said that you have to contribute to open source. There is this program called as Hacktoberfest because the month of October was going on. And if you happen to get 4 of your contributions merged, you will just get a t-shirt. And that was more motivation for me than any other article or any other blog would have provided. So I just got started. I made 4 of my contributions. And not only that, I helped my other friends also got started with it. They didn't actually happen to like do open source much because they were just interested in that t-shirt. But that actually got me a very good head start with the whole process. So after Hacktoberfest, I participated in JIT Month of Code, where I got one of the best mentorships I ever had. So his name was Anmol. Back then, I guess he was working with Postman. Right now, he's working with Expedia as a data engineer. And again, I got a very good expertise with scripting, automation, and all of these things in the open source domain itself. So after these, like, I started contributing to more of these open source programs like Girl Skill Summer of Code and more of them. But I wanted to contribute in one specific open source program that was Google Summer of Code. So I started writing a proposal. I connected with some of the mentors and more of them. I was going to hit the submit application button, but at the last moment, I just backed off. That was the Google Summer of Code 2020. So it was kind of a shocking for me because once the application period was over, the mentor actually reached out to me and he said, like, I read your proposal when you had shared it as a draft, and I was very happy to like actually select it if I had the opportunity. But simply because I had this imposter syndrome that I was not simply enough right now, and I didn't have the skills that I'd mentioned on my proposal, I just backed off it. So the entire year was like spent on introspection, like learning new things, doing some internships here and there. And this was when I got a real break into the open source development through the MLH Fellowship. So MLH Fellowship is like a 3 months long fellowship program where you're basically paired with multiple students from various domains and various skill sets, and you get to build projects in open source. So after MLH Fellowship, I was like really confident that, okay, my open source development skills are really good right now. I can contribute to some really good projects. Like during my MLH Fellowship, I contributed to various projects at Google, Uber, Microsoft, and more. So I was really on a head start that, yes, this time I can write a much better proposal and I can get selected in Google Summer of Code. So I did write a proposal. I got selected into Google Summer of Code through Metacall. And not only that, I also got selected into Google Season of Docs, which is like a twin open source program that goes hand by hand to Google Summer of Code. Google Summer of Code is more focused towards open source development in terms of coding. Google Season of Docs is more focused towards technical writing. So I completed both of these programs successfully. Right now, I'm just serving as Google Summer of Code administrator with Mojo Global. So that has been my pretty journey in the whole open source domain.
Okay, that's really, really impressive. You spoke about a part of your journey where you didn't think you were enough to join the Google Summer of Code. What do you think are the steps that a student should follow to reach to the level where he or she feels that he can be a part of such programs?
I guess this question is not needed right now because a lot of students really have a good confidence on their skill set. But for people like who especially doubt their skills, there is only one thing that I would say, like, please don't do it. Because software development is a field where everyone gets stuck by imposter syndrome at one time or the other. So it is like, no matter how good you do, it can be an open source, it can be on your job, it can be on your internship. You will always think that whatever I'm doing, it is just not enough. Someone can just easily replace me. Someone will just point out the mistakes in my work. They will point out the failures that I have done in the past, and I would be just in shambles. So just don't think about that. Just focus headstrong on your goal and just keep moving towards it. That would be my only advice. So if you're especially applying for Google Summer of Code, your proposal, your contributions don't matter much. It is your interactions with the mentor and your understanding of the code base. Because I have seen a lot of people who have been very, very confident that they can easily like pass Google Summer of Code. And let me tell you, getting selected into Google Summer of Code is much, much easier than actually passing Google Summer of Code. So a lot of my friends have failed in the midway itself. And that was purely because they were simply very, very overconfident that I understand this project, I have a good rapport with the mentor. I can easily do it, but once they start doing it, the work is simply not up to the mark. So just focus on a few things first. Just focus that your communication with your mentor is really good. It is something that both of you have reached a common consensus at. The second, you have a good understanding of the core base. Don't sign up for something that you don't understand yet, because a lot of people will say that let's do a hard project because no one else is applying for it. The reason why it's a hard project is because it's literally a hard project. And some of these projects might not have been solved by the mentors themselves. Like I had one of my friends working with Matplotlib, and his project was something that has been not worked over for the past 1 decade. So just steering through it and steering through the complexity and the various stakeholders in that project is literally very difficult. So don't sign up for something that you don't understand yet. The reason why he passed the program in a spectacular way is because he had a very, very good understanding of the whole thing. And he knew like how he can devise a solution out of that. And lastly, build some real world skills. If you're saying that I'm a mean stack developer, I'm a MERN stack developer, I'm a Python developer, that doesn't mean anything. Because sometimes you might have to go to some like unnavigated waters. And if you're just going into that domain and you're just thinking that let me just stick with my core technology first, that won't do the trick. If I take my example, my project was in kernel programming, and I have never done kernel programming before. So it was like a very good challenge for me. I just went through the documentation. I understood the whole thing. I started writing the code base. We had to do multiple refactors. First, it was written in C++, then it was written in Python. Now we are just thinking to redo the whole thing. So it just goes about on and on. It's all about like optimizing the software for the best complexity. So, yep, that would be the whole advice.
Okay, great. Speaking about your proposal to GSOC and GSOT, what are the steps that you followed while writing the proposal? How does one write an effective proposal that might
In
get
case of Google Season of Docs, the process is pretty decentralized. So for anyone who doesn't know what Google Season of Docs is, then it is like a 6 months, like it can go from 4 months to 6 months long open source program. And it totally depends upon the organization themselves on how they want to conduct it. So in case of Google Summer of Code, you have to submit a proposal to Google. Google will be sending that proposal to different other organizations, like depending on what interest you have expressed. In Google Season of Docs, you have to approach the organizations yourself. So you have to reach out to them. You have to write out a mail. And if they have like some specific requirements, like they will say that you have to write a proposal, or they might say like you have to give an interview with us, or they might just say like you have to complete this assignment for us. Based upon that, they might make a selection. So it totally depends upon the organization how they want to select a particular person to work with them. It can be a student, it can be a professional, and I've seen like professionals getting selected with multiple years of experience. So for a lot of students, they especially don't have any chance like going out like in this particular competition. So I know a few organizations that might select based upon a proposal. Mojo Global is one of these organizations where I am mentoring. So at Mojo Global, we just happen to like ask proposals from everyone. And based upon the proposal, we make the selections. There are other organizations like there is Chaos, there is WeChat. Like all of these organizations make their selection based upon the proposals itself. Now there are some organizations like Async API, Signos. They might conduct interviews to basically select their Google Season of Docs interns. Whereas like there are some organizations like Simpai. Like Simpai pays the most in Google Season of Docs. It nearly pays around $15,000. That's nearly 11 lakh rupees to a single person. But the person they selected was much before they actually got selected for Google Season of Docs. So they had someone whom they had in their minds. And once they happened to get selected, they just announced that particular candidate as the selected one. So we simply don't have any say in that whole process. In case of Google Summer of Code, things get interesting. You have to write a proposal, and proposal is mandatory. And it is not like if a particular mentor likes you and they think like you will be a good fit for the project, you can simply escape writing the proposal. That won't happen, because once a mentor happens to select your proposal, they also need to verify through the administrator itself. So the administrator needs to say like, this is the proposal that my mentor selected, and this is the proposal that I want to sponsor for this Google Summer of Code. So you really need to be sure that your proposal is actually one of the best. So for anyone who is aspiring for Google Summer of Code, just get started with open source development. Reach out to any organization that has participated in Google Summer of Code and has some intentions in participating in the future as well. Like for example, Mozilla has participated a lot of times in the past, but they did not participate this year, and they might not participate in the future as well. So it might not be very suitable for you to actually contribute to Mozilla just for the purpose of Google Summer of Code. So reach out to any organization that you are interested in. Reach out to the specific mentors or admins or the maintainers, and just say to them like, hey, I want to contribute to this particular project and I have these kind of skill sets. And I also want to learn these particular stuff. A lot of people who come into these open source projects, they basically come with a clean slate. They don't know anything about what the project is made of, what algorithms are used, how the project has been architectured, and more of that. So just let them know that you know these things and you want to learn these things. And they can perhaps create a scope for you that, okay, you might contribute to this particular part of the project so that you can gain these particular skill sets. So this is the easiest way in which you can get started. And this will also help you land some really good contributions so that you can easily optimize a proposal. And once you get on the chance of like writing a proposal for yourself, let me tell you, like, things are really easy because you understand the code base, you understand the architecture, you understand your project scope. So nothing is going to basically stop you from doing the rest of the stuff. Yeah.
Okay, great. Speaking about students' contributions, what do you think are the students' takeaways from contributing to open source development? Because it seems a little bit one-sided, where a student is applying his knowledge to improve something that he's already seen on the net. So what do I as a student learn from that process?
So as a student, you will learn a lot of things that possibly no other internship or no other like student projects might be able to tell you. So in case of a student, most of the times that we spend at college, it is usually spent at doing assignments, exams, doing college projects,
Exactly. Yeah.
and maybe in your third or final year, maybe doing internships. So once you land into an internship, you will be like simply startled. Like, okay, there is this Git, that is the version control system. There is GitHub, which is the source code management. There is issues. There is pull request or merge request. There is a CI/CD pipeline that triggers every time you write some code. So every time you write some code, you push it to a branch, you make a pull request or a merge request. There will be some pipelines running that will execute your code and they will see if it is correct or not. So that whole experience is simply overwhelming for someone who has never done software development before. So what is the easiest way of getting that experience? The best way is doing open source development, because no one is really going to judge you. You're not really getting paid for it unless and until you are a part of some open source program.
Yeah.
All that you're doing is for your own learning and for your own experience. So now after that, you get into some sort of an internship program. These things won't bother you much. It will be like your daily bread and butter. You know these things from different projects, from contributing to different aspects of software development. So you can easily get started in your present internships and present jobs as well. There is no exact survey about it, but one thing that I can say for sure is that someone who has done open source development before, they would be able to steer their main jobs and main internships in a very, very easy manner. I'm yet to come across someone like who has done open source before, who really struggles at doing real-time software development. Because open source not only improves your software development and coding skills, they will also improve your soft skills. The way you communicate with the maintainers, the way you communicate with the mentors, and more of that. Let's just take an example for this. Let's say you are trying to implement a particular feature. Now you want to communicate that feature with the mentors or with some people like for the maintainers of the project. How exactly are you going to do that? You might either create an issue or you might create a discussion. And that whole issue or that whole discussion process is very, very synonymous to how actual engineering happens in different companies. Like, for example, when I wrote my GSOC proposal, I had to like take care of a lot of different things. Like, why did I choose this particular technology and why not some other technology? What is the particular architecture of my entire project? What are the different constraints or what are the different things that I don't know about? and something that I need the maintainers' help with. We had to do the same thing when I was working at my last company at HackerRank, because every time we had to like implement a new software component, we had to write a proposal, we had to get it approved by the lead engineer, and then we had to start the overall software development process. So as you see, the whole open source model is built in such a way that companies also replicate in real-time manner. Like whatever companies I have worked at, all of them basically have the same paradigm as open source development. The only difference is like they have private repositories and they don't have public repositories. So open source development can really open a lot of gateways for you, not just in aspects of learning, but also in terms of opportunities like internships, fellowships, grants, maybe some like open source programs like Google Summer of Code or Outreachy. And maybe even you can convert your open source development into some sort of a job. A lot of different open source maintainers are taking a break from their regular jobs at various big tech companies, and they're just starting full-time on open source itself. I know one particular maintainer, he's the maintainer of Rich, which is a Python library. So he just took a break from his entire job and he started contributing to his library itself so that like he can make it much better and much bigger as well. And their like funds are sponsored by various companies, like especially depending on the projects that he's creating. So doing full-time open source is also a very lucrative job option. And it is also quite a good option for people like who really have their roots in the open source development. So, yeah.
Okay, that's great. That's a really large number of takeaways for your contribution. I mean, there is experience, there is knowledge, then there is communication. A lot of different aspects are being touched at the same time. Speaking of opportunities, what would you like to say about remote opportunities, especially now in the COVID era? That's basically how most of the engineers worldwide are doing their work. Now a lot of offices are opening up again. But what do you think are the different aspects of remote jobs? What are the pros and cons?
So in remote jobs, I think a lot of people are attracted to remote jobs just by one thing, the comfort of working from home. So I remember one of my friends, like he's actually working at one of the banking firms and he's an analyst over there. So I remember like when his work from office started, he just gave me a call and he was like, just refer me to some remote company because I don't really want to go to office. So going to office is a very dreaded experience for a lot of people. I have been to office like just once or twice, like in my previous internships, not much. So I won't comment on that. But the main reason why a lot of people basically go for remote jobs is for two reasons. The first one, the remote option itself, like working from home. The second reason is the compensation. Now, there is a lot of debate going around LinkedIn and Twitter about remote job opportunities and like what exactly it pays. And let me tell you one thing, like it might be a very myopic point of view because based upon my experience, but a lot of people might have also experienced it, that remote job pays exponentially more than what a lot of Indian companies might pay. And this might be for lesser amount of work hours as well.
Okay.
So I have like known a lot of people from various service companies, like they are my seniors and some of them are my peers as well right now. They are spending long hours at office and all, while I'm doing like much lesser, while I'm being compensated more for those hours. So the reason behind this is most of the remote companies right now are technically in the startup phase. They're not full-fledged companies. They have not gone public, and they have a lot of VC money to burn. I'm yet to come across like any remote company which is entirely bootstrapped, and it pays really well. So in this case, they actually have a lot of capability and the capacity to hire more and actually pay more as well. So this is the best part about like doing remote jobs, because you don't have to go anywhere. You can easily sit in your home, you can do your job, and you can be easily compensated for that. But what exactly are you missing in the whole process? The first thing is you are missing the whole osmosis that is present around the office. So you go to office, you sit on your desk, you see a lot of different people talk about different things. I remember when I went to my office like almost 1 or 2 months back at HackerRank, I remember that most of the time we were spending was around in discussions around the whiteboard. So we were discussing about language servers, we were discussing about language server protocols, we were discussing on how to make our IDs faster, and a lot of different teams were collaborating together. Like engineering manager was sitting, the platform engineers were sitting, front-end engineers were sitting, sometimes even product managers might join us, and everyone would participate in a lively discussion. It might go for 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and no one would be hardly bored. But in case of remote jobs, what we just have is like a Zoom meeting where everyone joins in. one person speaks, few of them listen, and few of them just dozes off. And once the Zoom meeting gets over, your part is done, your work day is over. So this osmosis of information and for experience is something that you will sorely miss in remote job opportunities. Again, different companies might have different ways of approaching it. Some companies might have like some different means of communication. Like some of them might use some async communication like Slack and all of these. But it totally depends upon the end person on whether they want to be a part of the process. Because companies might risk themselves of going into a side where they might just think, where the employees might just think like they are being micromanaged. So, for example, I have seen like some companies in the remote option, but they will just ask all of the employees to join a Zoom meeting and then do all sort of discussions. So even if it is going beyond 1 hour, everyone would be simply bored. And they would just think like, since we are being asked to be a part of the Zoom meeting and do our work, we are simply being micromanaged right here. So this is something that not a lot of people might like. Now, coming to the students like trying to apply for remote job opportunities, I don't have an exact figure, but I can just presume that over a million students might graduate out of their engineering colleges every year. Now, there is one thing for sure is that the remote job market is not that much that it can accommodate all of the students, not even 1% of it. So that's the reason why a very less number of students actually approach these remote job opportunities. And remote job opportunities might only come through one thing, and that is awareness. So simply because few people are more aware than the others, that gives them a very good head start in applying for these remote job opportunities. For a lot of different other people, the only option that they have is just practicing DSA, just practicing some competitive coding problems, and just participating in their college placements.
Right.
So the actual thing that people need is simply not feeding up the funnel. And that's the reason why a lot of people are just missed out on the opportunity. So that is the whole scenario around remote job opportunities. So, yeah.
Exactly. So there are some good aspects of it, which are basically it saves time, it gives a lot more compensation. But then there are also the cons, which is the lack of a connection, lack of interaction, which are both, I mean, equally weighed out. Okay. Now, the first confusion in every student's mind, especially starting off in the first year, is do I practice web and app development or do I just do core coding? Because that is what they tell you. You know, if you want a placement, you should practice CP. That is it. And you should be able to participate in CodeChef and HackerRank and all their competitions. So what do you think about this kind of conflict between these two? Do you think a student can integrate both of these and work forward?
I believe that if you're in your first year and you had some very basic introduction to coding, don't just start with web development, because the end goal that you are trying to reach is to become a software engineer. And a software engineer can work on different domains altogether.
Right.
So I can take the example, like recently one of the engineers has created Bun. I'm sure like you might not have heard about that. But this particular project is pretty much open source, and it has created a shockwave in the whole open source world right now, because it is a JavaScript runtime and it is much faster than Node.js. So this particular engineer worked at various companies. One of these companies is Stripe, and he engineered a lot of different things. Now, Bun is entirely a web project. It is something that accelerates your JavaScript development and all of that stuff. But without a core knowledge of software engineering, this could not have been possible. So remember that if you're trying to jump into web development, all of the things that you are doing is just working with these like abstracted technologies. You want to implement a web page, just use React. You want to write a component, you want to like implement state management, just use Redux or Context API. But what it takes to actually build something like React, what it takes to actually build something like Context API or Redux, this is where your software development skills will really come into play. So if you don't have any skills around data structures, any skills around algorithms, or any intuition on how I can build such systems which can make things much efficient and less complex, then you would be like spending your entire development life just working with these abstracted technologies. So today you have got technologies like React or Vue.js. After 5 years, it will be something else. After 10 years, it will be something else. And this is where you will start seeing that people who have been doing data structures algorithms for the most period of time, they will start going ahead in their careers. And this might be a complete generalization. I'm quite sure about that. But this is something that I have seen most of the times in my case. So if you're someone like starting just right now, just focus on one thing, that is getting the basics right. If you are like looking for an internship or maybe a job on an immediate basis, this is what happens for people like who are coming from different backgrounds. Like I've known some people coming from different backgrounds like commerce or literature. They start thinking that, okay, computer science is something that I can like see, do a better career in. Yeah. So for
Easily
them,
pick up.
doing web development is simply easier because it has a lower barrier of entry and you can easily find opportunities correlating to it. But if you're a computer science student or if you're coming from a core engineering background, doing data structures, doing algorithms, doing some core CS things will really benefit you a lot in the long run. So let me just give you an example for this. So last year I was working with this particular company called as QuantSight. So at QuantSight, I was involved in the re-engineering of CI/CD pipelines for SciPy. So CI/CD pipelines are basically automated pipelines. So every time you every time you write a code, you make a contribution, these pipelines will just run. They will execute your code. They will execute the test and they will verify that whether your code is correct or not. Now it takes almost an hour to run these pipelines, and this is computationally expensive. Even though we are getting these pipelines for free thanks to GitHub Actions, we still want to like optimize it for the end developer. Like for example, if a developer makes a code contribution, they don't have to wait for an hour to see if their code is correct or not. So we started implementing like some abstractions. We started re-engineering the whole pipeline, and we reduced the whole thing to at least 20 minutes. So that is almost 3 times of reduction. Now, just to give a context, this 3 times of reduction will almost save GitHub $1 lakh every year for running these pipelines. So even though these pipelines are for free, GitHub is still spending, it's like burning its own money on these pipelines. And as the end developers, we are optimizing it. So that is obviously benefiting us and that is benefiting GitHub as well. Now, how did we make that faster? We actually used an algorithm called as directed acyclic graph, basically called as DAG. So for people like who are practicing graph algorithms and graph data structures, they might come across this particular concept there. So this actually helps us to verify that whatever code has been built before, we don't need to build it again. Whatever code has been changed, just build it now and then link it with the other built parts of the code. Like that's the simplest analogy that I can particularly give. But as you can see, like this is how optimizations and this is how like real world engineering involves and correlates a lot with data structures and algorithms as well. So just pick up like other stuff as well. Like recently I started using this particular terminal called as VARP. So it is like a GPU accelerated terminal for like doing all sort of daily activities. On the underneath, it is actually using binary trees for like dividing multiple panes on it. So every software that you see today is using data structures and algorithms in some or the other manner. Sometimes you might also be using it, like sometimes you will be using hash maps or lists on your particular code, and it will be just abstracted. But sometimes you just need to get your hands dirty with those concepts and get started with it. So spend your first 2 years of your college just learning core coding. You don't exactly need to get into CodeShip or code courses to like participate in some competitive coding contest. If you actually have an interest in doing competitive coding, then maybe you can go into that. But for the rest of the part, to practice yourself and to make sure that your edge is sharp, HackerRank and LeetCode is more than enough. Once you have the basic understanding, then try to start implementing some like real world projects. This is when you can like learn different skills like web development or backend development or whatever that interests you, and see like how you can actually integrate these real-time data structures and algorithms to make those faster and more efficient.
Okay. So considering your vast experience with a diverse range of softwares, can you speak about the most amazing project that you find yourself making, something that you've learned a lot through and you think that can give back to society?
My work at SciPy was really exciting, to say at the least. But perhaps the most intuitive project that I did was last year during my Google Summer of Code. So I mentioned like during my Google Summer of Code, I was actually working on a kernel library. So we basically engineered a project through which we can make inter-language function calls possible. So let us consider this one thing. You write a function in Python, and this is a very simplistic function. Like let's say you're trying to call a machine learning model to do some sort of a pre-processing and some sort of an inference, and you want to get that output. Now you want to integrate this machine learning model with JavaScript. So what are the ways that you can do it? The first way is just build an API out of your Python script. So convert that into an API, upload that on a server. it will have an endpoint. Just hit that endpoint and you will get the inference. That's a very good way of doing it. But what if you want this particular script to be a part of your JavaScript project? So this is where we build something around the core library. What core library does is making inter-language function calls possible. So if you have written a function in Python, you can call that in JavaScript.
Okay.
And for that to be made possible, we use our own protocol that is called as Metacall's core protocol. So this core protocol basically maps all of the languages together, and it has its own object notation of how it denotes particular data types in one language and how it denotes the data type in the other language. So this is actually a very intuitive way of migrating a lot of code. So you can just think that you can write a lot of code in C or C++, like those particular portions of code that need to be fast and need to be efficient, and you can just call these particular codes in different other languages. So you write a code in X language, you call that code in Y language. That was the whole crux of the project. And you can expose it through a Jupyter interface. So now on the Jupyter interface, you can do something that we call as a polyglot development. Polyglot development in the sense that you can combine multiple different programming languages and you can build your application. So in the future, like let us say someone wants to use Python for machine learning, they can do it. Someone wants to use JavaScript for front-end development, they can do it. Someone wants to use Ruby for backend development, they can do it. And they can easily integrate all three of these technologies together and they can start exposing it through the Metacall's protocol. That was the whole outline of it.
Okay, wow. That's really unbelievable. Yes. That's a confluence of all different types of working with softwares and programming languages.
So one of the good parts about this project is we actually benchmarked it against like hypertext transfer protocol. This is what we use for like building REST APIs and all of that. And our if we try to run a Flask server on Metacall's protocol, that is almost 15 to 20 times faster than what we run on HTTP. So this was like an interesting benchmark. I presented this at a lot of conferences like PyCon India, or PyCon Malaysia, PyCon APAC, and it was really well received. So that was kind of an achievement as a project.
That's a really big achievement. Do you document all of these processes? I mean, I know that you do a lot of technical writing on your LinkedIn profile. How do you document this? Do you do it on a daily basis? What's your schedule for that? And how does it help?
Tool called as Notion. So for people who don't know what Notion is, then Notion is like a personalized wiki for you. So you can just create tables, you can create databases, you can create pages, and you can also create multiple directories where you can just store all your information. So I use Notion for all of my activities, like creating a daily log of the things that I did, or just writing down different technical documentation, like around my projects and the things that I'm doing, or just taking notes, like taking to-do lists and all of that. So I usually do that on a weekly basis. So every week I just sit down, I write down all of the activities that I did, my thought process around them so that I can reiterate on them later and see on what exactly I can basically improve on. So this is actually a very good exercise because it allows you to exercise on the things that you have been doing in the past and what are the things that you can possibly improve in the future. So like, let us say you wrote some particular piece of code, a developer commented on it and say like, hey, we can just improve it in this manner. You take a mental note of it, you create an example out of it. Maybe you can put it on Twitter, maybe you can put it on LinkedIn. A lot of people do that. They basically create content around these experiences. Or if you can just put it in your private directory so that you can use it for your own reference, whatever that suits you. And this would actually form a very good part of your knowledge base. So remember, engineering is all about like creating knowledge bases. No one exactly pays you for the kind of years that you spend doing software engineering. Everyone is paying you like for the kind of experiences that you had. So you experience building a complete end-to-end web application fast company. Now, another company wants to have someone with a similar kind of expertise. So they might try to hire you for that particular role. Sometimes you might have developed a machine learning API that did some particular thing. And now other companies are also like trying to develop the similar thing. So in that case, they will try to hire you based upon your experience. So the whole software engineering game is all about like the experiences that you had doing different kind of things. So always try to diversify, try to experience different kind of things and see what exactly you're interested in. That will eventually like give you the taste of life as well.
Great. So it's basically about learning on the job and keeping all these learnings with you. That is what your technical writing is basically about. Now, speaking about technical writing, we'll move on to LinkedIn and how you have optimized it to suit your job to expand your outreach towards people and networking. How do you think it plays as an aspect
So I
of
would
being a professional?
seriously say one thing, like I have like not actually optimized LinkedIn to the best that I could have. The main reason is that I use LinkedIn just as a platform, like to put out my public opinions. So someday I write a blog, I just put it out on LinkedIn. Someday I just maybe like achieve something, maybe I will put out that on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn for me is not actually a content platform as of now. A lot of people use LinkedIn as a way to like put out their content. You might see them like writing posts almost every day or like every 2 days. So I don't have a YouTube channel. I don't have a podcast. I don't have any such thing. So I don't exactly feel the necessity of like
Right.
putting out a lot of content on LinkedIn as of now. So that's the reason why my LinkedIn growth has been like almost constantly like growing in a slothy manner. So I started doing LinkedIn back in 2019, I suppose. I remember my first post was a certification post. So I was just saying like, hey, I did the certification, just check it out here. My second post was like winning off a hackathon.
Right.
And then I just started putting out my personal accomplishments and all of these things. And people started connecting with me, and this led to the whole outreach on that. So if you're a student, and if you're like trying to be an aspiring content creator or anything as of such, maybe LinkedIn is a great platform for you because it gives you an exponential amount of reach compared to any other social media platform. But if you're just someone who's looking for different opportunities, just try to optimize your LinkedIn in such a way that it demonstrates the best of you. So all your experiences, all your accomplishments,
Exactly.
all your endorsements, everything about you should be visible on your LinkedIn profile. And that's the reason why I say that possibly my website is like a more outdated version of what I exactly represent. My LinkedIn is possibly the best version of what I should be representing. So just try to optimize your LinkedIn in such a way that it goes best hand in hand, and try to use the different LinkedIn functionalities. Like there is this LinkedIn Premium that allows you to connect with recruiters and different executives in different companies. So you can use that to just cold email them, like let them know about your profile and let them know if you're particularly interested in some job opportunity at their firm. You can also use referrals to actually like apply at some particular companies. You can use LinkedIn Learning to learn about various things. And I would dare say that LinkedIn Learning is actually much better than various other platforms like Coursera or Udemy. It may be because their content creators are much experienced in comparison. And you can also try connecting with different peers as well, because connecting with your peers will actually guarantee a lot, because a lot of the times I see that my peers might reach out to help from me, or I might reach out to my peers for some particular help around some domains. So it is a good acquaintance to make, and it also like contributes to your overall like community around yourself. So this is the reason why LinkedIn is so preferred right now. Again, I
Right.
see a lot of people basically dissing LinkedIn, saying that Twitter is much better, LinkedIn is just used for motivational stories and all of that. But it totally depends upon the people that you follow and the kind of content that you put. Just spend 5 minutes a
Right.
week to like just declutter all of these things. If you see someone posting a very like a rude opinion or something like a reel or a TikTok video that serves you no purpose, just unfollow that person and move on. It will make your feed much better, and you
Exactly.
will eventually get
Yeah.
to see like much more insightful posts. Like if I take my example, most of the time I see posts from a particular person known as Arpit. So Arpit is a engineering lead at An Academy. He creates a lot of content and system design, and I basically make sure that I go through all of his content. So that's a very good exercise, and LinkedIn is the best way of actually connecting with this kind of a content. Twitter is also a great place, but unfortunately, I don't have much experience with it.
Okay, so
Exactly.
it's basically the way you use it.
Yep.
If you use it to your best, it's gonna benefit you amazingly, and if
Yes. And
not,
don't
then you
indulge in
might not find the
controversies.
fruit.
One thing that I would share for sure.
Exactly.
Because indulging in controversies, like just putting out a simple comment or just putting out a simple like, it might not matter much. You will just think like, hey, I'm supporting my favorite content creator. But eventually you will be dragged into a mud game where people might just accuse you or counter accuse you of various things. So just keep your mind out of those things, and that will actually serve you much better. Yeah.
Okay. Now, again, let's move on to your talk, your impending talk at the OSS, the Open
Yeah.
Source System, the Open Source Summit, I'm sorry, the Open Source
So
Summit.
one
What
of
is
the
it
things that
going
I
to
have
be
been doing
about?
for past 1 year as a volunteer activity has been building mentorship opportunities. So I joined Mojo Global as a Google Season of Docs technical writer, and slowly I just took up the reins of the entire technical community over there. So I remember like I joined Mojo Global for the purpose of Google Summer of Code, but unfortunately we got rejected over there. And the main purpose of the main reason for rejection was very simple. We had very less number of contributors. Like last year when I was pretty much active, I'm still active right now, but when I was active back then and when I joined the community very new, I remember like only 6 to 7 contributors who were pretty much active. But right now we have almost 100 plus contributors who are actively contributing right now. So this whole 1 year, we spent a lot of efforts in optimizing different mentorship opportunities, making the whole contribution cycle much efficient for the end developers. So this was the reason why we got selected in almost all of the mentorship opportunities this year. We got selected into Google Summer of Code. We have been rejected last year, but we got selected this time. We got selected in Outreachy, Google Season of Dogs, LFX Mentorship, and some smaller mentorship programs like She Codes Africa, uh, Grace Hopper Celebration, Open Source Day, and more of these. So my whole talk is about how we can build this mentorship opportunities at different open source organizations, because a lot of different organizations are simply aloof from building these kind of mentorship opportunities. Because various organizations have like a lot of user base, they have a lot of stars,
Right.
but they just wonder like why exactly are we not getting more contributors? It's simply because the people who are looking to contribute, they don't find enough ways to contribute, or maybe they don't find enough communication medium so that they can start communicating with you. So this whole talk is about how organizations can optimize this experience, how they can capitalize upon various mentorship opportunities so that they can compensate their contributors in some way or the others, and how they can build a good name for themselves using these mentorship opportunities. That's the whole crux of the talk.
Okay, I'm sure your talk will be really helpful for
Yeah,
organizations
let's
as
hope so.
well as contributors. Last but not the least, we'll move on to OpenStack,
Oh, so it's
which
local
is the
stack.
startup you're working with. How did you
Yeah,
reach
it's local
them?
stack. So yeah.
Right.
So just for
Yeah,
like
local stack.
context, OpenStack is actually like an open source cloud computing infrastructure. That's a completely different story from local stack. But let's jumping back to local stack itself. Local stack is a pretty like different story, and it's a pretty different software domain altogether. So a lot of people right now are using Amazon Web Services, basically the AWS. So they use AWS services for different kinds of stuff. You want to use storage, you can use S3. You want to create your own server, you can use EC2. You want to like do some sort of machine learning stuff, you can use Recognition or you can use SageMaker. You want to like, let us say, like configure a domain for yourself, you can use Route 53. So AWS is not just a cloud computing service. It is a host of services that businesses can use for like building different kinds of stuff. Now there is one particular deficiency with AWS which we are targeting, and that deficiency is local testing and development. Now you can just go on Google, you can search for like AWS billing. You will see a lot of horror stories from people who have just turned on some particular service, they forgot to turn it off, and now they have just got a huge bill from AWS. Some people have some people have reported like getting bills of like 2,000 US
Okay,
dollars,
yeah.
5,000 US dollars, maybe 15,000 US dollars as well. I personally got like the highest bill that I have got from AWS is 1,05,000. And I had a really, really hard time convincing that this was entirely a mistake. I did not use it. Please down
Right.
that bill for me. And they did that because AWS support is quite friendly. But again, that is a very horrid experience. You can like see your entire life savings, like just draining down on
Right.
AWS bills. But now this is an
Trained.
interesting story. Most of the people who are trying to use these services, they were not using it for actual production. They were using it for just testing and development. So what if we can provide them a tool so that they can just do development and testing pretty much on their local machine without having to interact with AWS? So you can create an S3 bucket. S3 is like the storage solution for
Okay.
AWS. So you can store infinite number of data in that S3. What if you can just create an S3 on your machine? You can test it out, you can play with it, you can like create a software around it, And once you're putting that in production, just replace that endpoint, like basically a URL, from localhost to the actual production URL, and you are done. So all of the local testing and development will happen on your local machine. All of the production will happen on AWS. So that's the most simplistic explanation of local stack. So what local stack is providing is Amazon AWS APIs on your local machine inside a container. So every time you install local stack, you run the container, you will basically get a localhost URL, and you can pretty much do everything with that localhost URL. So it has most of the AWS services that people use. It has got like S3, EC2, ECS, IAM, Route 53, and more of that, so that people can just use them. They can just try that out. They can just test it out. And once they are pretty much confident that, yes, we are like ready to go with it, they can simply put that on AWS. So we are not exactly stealing any business from AWS. We are just helping developers so that they can deploy on AWS much more confidently. So local stack was created at Atlassian back in 2017. And when it was created, it was actually a raving project. So local stack had its product market fit even before the company was started, because people loved it so much and they started using it even as an open source project. So in 2021, the developers, like the creators of local stack, started thinking that maybe we can incorporate it as a company. And that's the reason why local stack was created. Like as a company, local stack had existed as an open source project before. So now we have a open source community version. We have a closed source pro version where people like who are quite enthusiastic about local stack and they just think that local stack is much suited for their needs. They can just pay us some amount of money and they can just use local stack. Like that's the whole startup and that's the whole business model out of it. And we have a lot of different customers. Some of these customers might include one of the most popular OTT services in India, banking firms, cloud computing and DevOps firms, and more of them. So right now, the entire user base of local stack is more than 1 lakh plus. So it's a good product and there are interesting updates coming soon. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So again, local
That's
stack
very
is
exciting to hear.
local stack is a developer tool.
Coming to the
local stack is a developer tool, basically what we call as dev tools. So it's like not a consumer facing product like various other startups in India. So we might only see that only developers are using it, but the exponential impact of like trying to save your AWS costs during development and testing is much, much more. So that's the entire purpose of local stack.
Okay, that's a very meaningful project going forward. It may have multifaceted benefits for the community. Yeah. Now coming to the last part of our interview, what are your advices or takeaways for students from your whole entire journey?
A lot of the students that I see like have pretty normal dreams, like, hey, I'll just get my DSA right. I'll practice like 400, 500 lead code questions. I'll like do some DSA sheet. I'll get into some company and that is it. Let me tell you, that's just the start of your journey. It is perfectly okay if you want to do that, but just remember that your entire engineering journey has much, much different things to offer. So dream higher, explore a lot of different things, gain awareness, and don't just take that awareness for yourself. My biggest deficiency has been that all of the awareness and all of the things that I got in my college time, I was not able to pass that on to my peers, which could have benefited them a lot. So I was like aloof from community a lot of time, and it was only when I became a GSOC lead, I started giving back out to my community through my juniors and my other peers, but still it was on a quite late duration. So whatever you gain, whatever awareness you gain, try to make sure that your peers are also benefiting from it. You might see them sometimes that they are out competing you, but trust me, at the end of the journey, like it's not a zero-sum game. For you to succeed, others don't have to fail. Everyone can succeed at the same time.
Yeah.
So just go about getting this awareness, see how the world exactly works, and how exactly you can create an impact through your skills. Don't just build your skills for like cracking some particular interview. Create your skills for creating some particular impact. Because you go into an interview, the interview asks like, what sort of an engineering impact did you create in your past job or your past internship? You should really have something really concrete to say. So a lot of different people have like, okay, let me just do DSA. I'll crack like 10 different companies. And once I join this company, I will again crack another company and I will leave this company after 6 months. So they will like entirely go on job hopping. That's not the purpose of engineering. As an engineer, you should have some problem solving skills.
Yeah.
And you should really show that, okay, these are the things that I've solved in the past. And these are the things that I can solve right now. So try to build that kind of a career for yourself. Don't try to go into like this hyper like mode. You're just trying to gain different things altogether and maximize your earnings and your whole experience. So go a bit slow, but also dream higher. That would be my whole point.
Okay, that's really valuable advice considering having a purpose and having a particular
Exactly.
impact on whatever
Sure.
field you're working in. So thank you, Harsh.
Thank you so much for watching today's video. All of Harsh's work, as in his LinkedIn and GitHub links, have been provided in the description below. If you found this conversation interesting, insightful, please head to the comments, like and share section. Please subscribe to our channel for many more such insightful videos and content. Thank you for watching today's video. Signing off.